welcome to another episode of the Influential Nonprofit. As always, I'm your host. I'm Mary Ann. I work with nonprofit leaders to grow their influence so they can ask for and receive anything they want, need, and deserve without feeling the big three. We don't want to feel rejected, ineffective, or pushy. Who wants to be that? And I'm with Sara, and I just forgot how to pronounce your name, Hoshooley.
Yeah, perfect.
Yay, okay, yay, Hoshooley. And I even practiced, and we're going to talk today about smaller nonprofits, which what I'm learning is most nonprofits are smaller, because that's what you love to do. And you're a consultant and coach who loves working with small nonprofit organizations. And you were a former executive director, so you live the life. You're an embodied person, and we're going to talk about donor engagement for small organizations. So I'm very excited. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. So before we start, I always start with the same question. Tell me something that you're proud of in your life. Could be any aspect of your life that you don't get to brag about a lot.
Oh, that is such a good one. That I don't get to brag about a lot. Well, I guess I've moved. So I live in Canada, Toronto, Canada, and I've moved across the country twice. Once about 15 years ago, I moved from Ontario to Vancouver, lived there for 15 years. And then last summer, my partner got a job in Toronto, Ontario. And so we moved back. So I've moved across the country twice, and learned a lot both times. When I moved 15 years ago, I was not really as much of a grown-up as I am now. So that it was a big difference between moving as, a 20-something compared to an adult with, a career and a life and a family. But yeah, I'm pretty proud that I've been able to live on both sides of the country, which are very different from each other.
So what's the big lesson? What do you think the big lesson you had from those experiences?
I think not having too many expectations. I think both relocations, I had some expectations of things that would be really easy that weren't, and things that I thought that would be really hard, but weren't at all. Getting used to new cities, I find fairly easy. Moving back to Ontario, I found it really hard. My partner and I spent pretty much the last year just getting our house decorated of what do we want it to look like and what do we want our space to feel like. And, being in the same space for a really long time, you kind of forget what it's like to start everything brand new. But yeah, I feel really lucky that, working remotely and being able to connect with people like this over Zoom, it kind of doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't.
Where we're physically located, we can always connect with people and check in.
And that was for me the gift of COVID, was learning that, there's no geographical boundary, exactly. Right? Because my whole business changed, and I was, flying here and flying there and speaking here and speaking there, and I go, oh, this is so much easier.
Yeah.
And here's one more thing I want to say is one of the principles of people who follow me know this principle well. The biggest thing about release the outcome. So when I work with people on fundraising or asking for what they want, the first step is to not want it. Which seems counterintuitive, right? But the more you want something, the less likely you are to get it, right? So the higher expectation you have, the more likely you are to be disappointed. So in a sense of just releasing the outcome, whatever will be. I mean, I can hold space for, man, I'd love for this to work out, or I'd love for this person to enroll in my program or something, and I'm okay, right? And whatever it is, and so holding that, and that's sort of like what your lesson was, is the less expectation you have, the more that you're not judging what's happening to you. Right. I thought this was going to be fast, but it's actually slow, because people say, oh, finally, or I was still those are your judgments in your brain that you assigned. It was going to take this long. Yeah. And when that didn't manifest the way you wanted, right, then you're like, oh, well, now I'm judging that, when if you have no expectation, it doesn't matter. Right. It doesn't matter. Anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just love the release the outcome is the biggest thing. And people tell me all the time how they took a workshop or listened to the podcast or something, and they're like, and I think about that all the time. And I'm like, yes.
And I think too, it opens up the opportunity for things that you didn't even know were possible. If you're so fixated on an outcome of I want this particular thing to happen, something else might happen that's just as good or even better that you didn't even know was a possibility. So it's also allowing for the unknown.
The unknown, right? And like, if
Way.
you, and let's get into like, because the donor relations, because that is one of the
Yeah.
things that I talk about is if you
Yeah.
have an agenda, right? And you're like, I want this person to do this, then I'm listening or connecting to that person based on their ability to fulfill this need or not. And instead of and so I tend to pick the pieces that fit my narrative and discard the pieces that do not, instead of just like really listening to that person and those needs. And this is in fundraising, this is really anything in life, the ability to connect in a meaningful way without needing somebody to do something, creates a whole nother level of conversation and connection and opportunity.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
All right, let's get into your stuff here, okay?
All right.
So go ahead. You are an executive director. So I would love to know a little bit your background and how you made your way to Charity Shift.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been working in nonprofit, mainly in fundraising leadership roles for the last 15 years. I was an executive director for Cystic Fibrosis BC and Yukon, so the west coast of Canada. We had a small team, 5 people that were spread out, a few within the region and then a few that were working remotely. And this was pre-COVID, so working remotely looked a little bit different back then. But my organization, I feel like we achieved so much despite being a relatively small organization. Prior to that, I had been at United Way and some other larger organizations. So I'm used to, the massive fundraising machines like a United Way, and kind of took some of those learnings and brought them to the small nonprofit. But I did find that there's certain things, and I'm excited to talk about this with you, is that I think sometimes what happens is we see what the big organizations are doing and we make assumptions that's the one and only true way to do things. And the reality is, I was talking to someone the other day and she was on an advancement team of 400. So 400 people just doing fundraising. I'd never heard of a team so large. And in a small organization, most of the organizations I work with, we may have 1 or 2 staff who do fundraising. But in most cases, most of the charities that I work with, everybody's just doing a bit of fundraising off the side of their desk. Their executive director is, leading it, maybe board and volunteers and some staff. And so when I was taking a look at what I wanted to do next in my career, I realized that as much as I love working within an organization, I really like being able to work with multiple organizations and really help them boost their fundraising internally. So I've done a lot of, I've studied philanthropic psychology, which was a big turning point for me. In recognizing how donor engagement and the ways in which we speak to donors can really make a huge impact. So I started Charity Shift. I've been doing full-time consulting since April 2020. It was an unfortunate time to start a business, completely coincidental with my schedule. But as we were talking earlier, being remote has allowed me to work with organizations all across the US and Canada. As well, I had some clients in Central America as well. So yeah, that's what brought me to Charity Shift and where I am today.
I've heard, I can't tell you, I don't know, maybe because I remember it, that people have said, I started in March of 2020, or I started by like, I don't know, like, and then like, whoops, like, and we're all okay, right? Like, we're okay. And my business shifted so much like after that, because when a lot of the projects I was working on went on pause, and I have a business coach, Michelle Villalobos, and she was, I'm like, I really want to teach people how to actually get what they want, like how to get a yes, how to enroll people in a vision. And she's like, okay, why don't you do that? I'm like, yeah, maybe. If I wasn't doing anything else, I might as well do that. And
Yeah.
it shifted my whole business, and my work became more about personal professional growth, right? Because that's what, I mean, that was keeping people from really communicating effectively externally. It wasn't the right message. It was their ability to stand in their value, to say bold things, to navigate controversy, all of those, that right. So when we dealt with that, then now all of a sudden it's so different. So in the end, I think we learn a lot of lessons. And one of the things that you talked about is like, let's just get this, like, what is a small nonprofit?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people are shocked when I give this statistic. So about 93% of all registered nonprofits in Canada and the US are considered small nonprofits, and their revenue is $5 million or less. So we tend to think of nonprofits as being these huge, massive colleges, universities, health organizations. And the reality is that's only 7% of them.
Right.
And so the 93% of us, we are considered small to mid-size, depending, but we do things differently. And I think it's really important to acknowledge both the challenges and the opportunities that come from an organization that's operating at that size.
I do see a lot of people who say, well, if we had this staff, or we don't have babies, and I hear this all the time, we don't have babies and puppies. I'm like, you think the animal, if you would think how many people said to me, we don't have babies or puppies, like it's really hard to get people to care. Like, okay, you would think the animal welfare industry would just be rolling in like cash,
Yeah.
right? Or we don't have this, and I do feel like we say, oh, like, I want to say envy, or we don't have that, therefore I can't accomplish what I want because I don't have those things. And what I hear you saying is, yeah, you can, right? Like and in fact, you could actually maybe do it, in a better way. I can't even imagine 400 people, but there's benefits to being small, right? And
Yes.
so, and we are nothing more than the stories that we tell ourselves, right? If we think it's going to be hard, it's going to be hard. If we think we need something to succeed, then we will need that thing. So we can reshift the story. So how do you help people like shift the story and allow them to understand they have what they need to be successful?
Yeah, great question. And that's one of the first things that I do when I'm working with an organization is I like to speak to not only their donors, but also their volunteers, board members, and staff, and ask them to tell me why they love the organization. And I think what happens is we do get in this mindset, right? Of like, I'm not this and I'll never be that. And I can't, I'll never get these big celebrities or have these huge events. But I think what happens is that when we start to hear about our work through the viewpoint of other people, it reminds us why we're doing what we're doing. And also it's almost like that reinforcement, right? Of like, oh yeah, I forgot that 5 years ago we did this amazing thing, or I forgot that, it might not seem like we're moving the needle on anything, but someone just reminded me that last year, I don't know, we had a 10% increase in, name whatever it is, right? And so I think that starts to kind of like level set and remind people of the good that they're doing. And I also think that, like, let's be realistic and also be unafraid to say no. A lot of us, we have board members, we have funders and donors that come to us and say, okay, here's what you have to do. You have to do this. Why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? And a lot of organizations, I think we get stuck in this like, oh, we should do that. And that is a great idea. And all of a sudden you get mission drift, where you're starting to do things that don't really fit with who you are and why you do it. And you're pulled in 1,000 directions. So you're doing nothing very well.
Right.
And I think, so when I work with organizations, I help them lay out a straightforward fundraising plan for 12 months. And it only has 3 goals. That's it, just 3. And those 3 might be large. They might be, find more unrestricted revenue from individuals and corporations. but everything that we're doing is going to drive towards that goal. So if somebody says, oh, why don't you call this celebrity and have them, talk about us on their social media? Well, it doesn't fit in with our goals, and great suggestion, not the suggestion for now. And we move on and we stick with what we are doing well.
Right. I do feel like, this is what I work with people on a lot of, like, somebody wants something. Oh, then we have to do it. Oh, board members suggest something. Well, they're, well, all right, so let's talk about what that looks like, or, right. And the way to navigate through that, because you can get really stretched. And you feel like you're beholden to people, right? Oh, they have the money. So I said, no, no,
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So this whole idea of the psychology of philanthropy, that sounds so good. So tell me about the minds of donors. How can we connect with them more effectively?
Yeah. So really, as I mentioned, it's something that really kind of changed my perspective with donor engagement. It's the Institute of Sustainable Philanthropy in the UK that does this research and this training. And essentially what it is rather than talking to a donor and a donor's behavior, so talking about what they did, it's talking about who they are. And it's really interesting because at first it just seems like such a minimal shift. But it really does start to shift the narrative for the donor and also how the donor feels, how connected they feel. So I'll give you an example. So let's say that you just made a $50 donation to an animal rescue shelter in your neighborhood. So the typical thank you email would be, thank you, Marianne, for your $50 donation to our local shelter. Because of donors like you, we're able to rescue more animals this year. So that's kind of, the more traditional way. The donor, the philanthropic psychology way, when we're talking to donor identity, is I want to talk to you, Marianne, of who the person you are. So what that looks like is saying something along the lines of, thank you, Marianne, for being the kind of person who believes that all animals in our community deserve to have a great start in life and deserve a happy home. And like, you hear that, right? It's like such a shift in language, but instead of me talking to this like transaction thing that you did, I'm talking to your identity, and your identity is now connected to the difference that you made as opposed to the $50 transaction. So it's really kind of like pulling out that language to talk to who people are and who they see themselves being in that moment that they decide to support the organization.
I love every single word of what you just
Isn't
said. And
it
I'm like,
so
and I'm
good?
just bathing in it right now.
I didn't make it up. Yeah.
No, right.
Yeah.
This is so aligned with what I teach. The way you're describing it is a little bit different, but
Yeah.
one of the things I talk about is people will buy, quote unquote, to the level they feel seen and heard. So I don't have to tell you all kinds of stats about my organization, like, oh, we're do this. I have to tell you how much I see you, right? There's a word that we like witnessing, like I witness a person that deeply cares about, because so when you were speaking, it was like you're speaking to me because I'm a foster mom for a rescue. I've always worked in animal rescue. Like, yes, that is like, I am the kind of person like that wants to help the most vulnerable. Like you're like, and yet like I feel seen, right? In that statement, I felt seen. And instead of saying, oh, we're so awesome at this, which you are, not doubting that, I'm saying like, I want you to feel seen, right? So, and what you said is for who you were when you made that gift, like how you felt, like what you wanted to feel about yourself when you made that gift. And instead of the thank you for your gift, it's, we're so grateful because it's going to allow people to do this. And I'm guessing you maybe add that later, but I hear what you're saying. It is such a subtle shift and also very powerful, right? Because people feel seen and understood. And when you feel seen and understood, you create trust, right? And I'm sure that's what they taught you.
Yes. And it also, I mean, if we think to take identity one step further, the clothes we wear, the products we buy, the car we drive, we're signaling our identity, right? There's reasons that we buy certain things, we invest in certain things because we want to show people I'm the kind of person who does this, who drives this kind of car, who goes to these types of events. And it's no different with our philanthropy, right? We are the type of person, there's millions, literally millions of organizations anybody could donate to every day of the year. So you need to identify that the person who made a donation to your organization, they felt something. They felt connected. They felt compelled to act and do something extraordinary. Because let's be honest, like the default answer to any ask is no, right? We're not talking about we're not talking about, oh, you put out a solicitation, you get a 90% response rate. No, like DM is what, 1% if you're lucky. Like even fantastic campaigns, the default answer is no. So we really need to, I think, take that into account and not lose sight of it, not lose sight of like what it actually means when someone's making that choice to make that donation, because they don't have to at all. They've chosen to, and there's a reason for it.
Yes. And I'm loving this conversation so much because one of the things that I teach is you can't make people care. Your job,
Right.
the job of your communications is not to make people care, it's to connect with like-minded people. Because the reason why, and also I love what you said, and I want to just pull that out a little bit because it's like this, like I'm not saying yes because of you. I'm saying yes to me, to something that's within me, right? I'm saying, yes, that is a change I seek. That is something that I believe in. And I'm doing it through the organization is a conduit for which, right? It's not the because of, it's through that, right? So,
Yes.
right. So if you like, I love the idea of this idea of like, how we like, I mean, this whole thing behind me, right? If you're listening to this, you can go look up on the YouTube, like, the pink wall and the think purple and all those are choices that I make to tell you something about me, right?
Yes.
There's like my company's courageous communication. I'm not going to sit, right? Like they're right. Or what I drive, how my hair looks, all like, because I'm telling you something about me. So, and I love this, like what you said, in the same way, philanthropy, how I choose is saying something about me, who I am as a person, what do I believe in, what do I identify with? And the charity, like the shoes or, the car, is the conduit by which I express that. Right.
Yes.
And it's not because, and I really want to emphasize this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And it's not because, you have great outcomes or, like the case for giving like, we do this and this is why we're so amazing. And I know you're amazing. I'm not, but it's like, that's not why people give. Right.
Yeah.
They give because they see it, because of their, from in your language, like their need to express who they are, just as if you would, right, clothes or a car or a home or anything.
Yeah. And I think we forget that, right? Like it's so easy to think, and I think like grant applications and putting together formal proposals, I think that's sort of like skewed our vision to thinking that's what we need to do. Because when we do a grant application or a proposal, we are in competition. We are getting in front of people who have, a scoring rubric or have, some sort of methodology to compare us to others. And we get very, very detailed into X number of this, percentage of this, dollars raised here, expenses there. But for individual donors, yes, that matters. It's important that you are trustworthy, that you're spending the money where you say you are, that you're making an impact. And you will have people who are motivated by statistics, by numbers. And so you do need to have some of that there. But at the end of the day, if you're moving somebody to take action, it's because something resonated with them personally, and we can't lose sight of that.
Right. I love what you said about like, yeah, okay, in the like we created everything just feels like one giant grant application.
Yeah.
Right? Like every relationship we have is like, oh, it's like we are doing grants. Like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a place for that, yes, right, in those proposals and those things. And also, right, and how we engage with donors is, and I say this all the time, it's less about our organization and more about just understanding who they are. And so how do you work with organizations, or if you could share a little bit with the audience today, what are some techniques to create more understanding with who your donors are?
Yeah. So a couple things. And first, I just wanted to go, as you were saying that, I was just reflecting. I was with one of my clients in Vancouver a couple weeks ago, and I've been working with them for nearly a year, and putting together a case for support. And a lot of our language is grant focused. And I've been, very deeply involved with this organization for the past year. And in this team meeting, I asked someone, can you describe this program? Like, just tell me this program in your words. And literally all of us around the table were just blown away, because we were so in the weeds of like, we are a registered charity, a 501c3, and our mission is to blah, 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 blah. And she was talking about transformations. She was talking, because she's a program person, she was talking about, this is what this program actually does to transform people's lives. I know because I've seen it, and here's what it is. And so in that moment, I said, we need to actually record this. So one of the simplest things I think, especially like any nonprofit can do, is that when you're talking about your work, try and record it. Try and have it, like if it's on a Zoom call, or even in a team meeting, like have your, whatever sort of transcribing system that you like to use, have it there, because the way that people speak about things is so much more human than the way we choose to write. And you'll find that as you start collecting content that way, it really does shift to become a lot more personalized without actually having to do any work, because you're just speaking and the transcribing is happening for you. So
Right.
yeah, I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, just really listening to what people are
Yeah.
saying, how people are talking about the organization. Listen, my old job, okay, 16 years I worked at this company, and we would do these initial visits. It was 501 creative. I talk about them all the time. It's branding, web design, print design, and we'd go talk to a client, and we'd say, our process is to do a lot of listening, and in the meeting, like in the initial meeting, like I just have to tell you the story because I just love it so much. I was doing this brainstorm, like a focus group kind of brainstorming thing with the board and staff of this camp, right? And this woman comes in, she's like, blah, blah, blah. I'm so glad you're here because this is way more than camp. And I was like, bam, like literally the first person that entered the room, the first thing they said, and I just went, way more than camp. I'm gonna sit on that for a second, right? And then, right, or like, people would say, I feel so strongly about serving boldly in my community, like, ooh, like that was a campaign we created, serve boldly, like, and so then we would go back to people and they would say, so you just listen and give us our ideas right back to us. I'm like, sometimes, yeah, but because our ears were open for it. Right. And also, there's also a whole nother thing in there that I'm not going to get into, but like actually when it was appropriate, like when they were ready to hear the idea, because if you would have said, oh, good, but they're like, wait, what? We just started. So you take the idea, like kind of put it aside, but that's how I got learned to train to listen, because the answers, that's what that's what I learned, is that the answers are within them. All I have to do is open my ears. So you are new, you're hearing it from this different perspective. You're hearing it in that story that somebody told you, like, oh my gosh. But then we get the pen to the paper and like, oh, we get all constricted, and we want to show polished, and people want real, they want authentic, they want vulnerable, they want open, they want those kinds of stories. They want to feel something, the real, right? And that's what you're pulling out. And I think that's magical.
Absolutely. And again, it's so easy. And as I mentioned, like the organizations I work with, they're already stretched. Like, I'm not coming in to give them more work. I'm coming in to hopefully make things easier while they're raising more money, because we're taking a look at, what are you doing that you're just doing it because somebody told you, or because you've been doing it every year, or whatever reason it happens to be. Does it work? Do you like it? Can we do something better? And so I like to kind of think of, what are the things that are taking a lot of time and having very little results? And one of the things, actually kind of going back to donor engagement, is that I'll tell you the typical process in most nonprofits: you give a donation, you get your thank you email, and then you get put into a generic newsletter list, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And maybe it's segmented. Most nonprofits don't have time for segmentation. Fair enough, totally get it. So one of the things that's worked really well for the organizations I work with is, number one, you should be communicating with your donors monthly, and it shouldn't be asking them. You don't need to be asking people all the time. What I see happening is, an organization will put out a newsletter every quarter. It has 12 stories. Nobody's reading them. It takes a whole lot of work. So instead, what I recommend is, for every team meeting, try and have it on your agenda, a 5-minute slot in your agenda, to just ask the team what's something interesting or something good or hopeful or incredible or beautiful. Like, tell me something that happened in the past week that really resonated with you. And then that becomes the content that you use for your newsletter. So it would be, I don't know, somebody says, oh, we, it's an after school reading program, and one of the kids came and said it was like he looked forward to it all week long to come to the program. Like, that's not a huge thing, but wouldn't that be nice for a donor to hear, right? And it takes a couple seconds to say that in a meeting. Again, I would have it recorded so that you're not having to write it out. But it also does another really interesting thing, where it gets the team to remember, like, why they do what they do and feel a little bit good about it as well, right? And then you're constantly generating content. And sometimes you might not have anything. It might just be like, I don't know, just a regular week, nothing to say. And that's okay. But at least if you have it, kind of on a weekly or even a monthly basis, you're generating that content. And it's coming from multiple perspectives as well. You might have, the receptionist who mentions something that they saw, or it might be the executive director. It doesn't matter. But it's just something to be able to generate that content and have something that that donors might like to hear about.
And I love what you said about, it gives the staff or whoever's in that meeting, right, the opportunity to celebrate.
Yeah.
Share and celebrate. Because what I see, and I do this myself, right? Oh, did that, good, check, next thing, check. Oh, he said, it was like, oh, awesome, check. Like, we're not, like, really celebrate, like, just feeling how good it feels to, have somebody, a kid who just can't wait. Like, this is the highlight of somebody's week. Like really feel that, because that's a cup filler, right? Like, that gives everyone energy, and you get a really good story out of it. And now people are looking for stories, right? Now they're looking for those things, right? We're training them to like, that's so, instead of, we're not really receiving it. You hear it and you go, oh, great, but maybe not really, receiving. And I love that. I think that's wonderful to incorporate something like that. Also, it just creates a system for content development, which is great, right? And just people who say, oh, I email people for stories, and you got to kind of catch them in the moment,
And you also, I've worked with a lot of organizations, and they say, oh, we really need to figure out how to work with program staff and get program staff involved with fundraising. Well, let's be honest, like, program staff are typically overworked. And when you give them a spreadsheet to fill out that says, what's the person's name? Do you have permission to share a photo? Do you have permission to share their quote? Do you have, like, that's just another thing to add to your list, right? Whereas this is just kind of like a conversational, like, story, and Sure. Could you maybe get an accompanying photo if it's appropriate? And could you share the person's name? Sure, maybe. And maybe not. Like maybe it's just like an anonymous quote from one of our staff people. And like that's good enough, right? You still get
Right,
the message across.
right.
And it's not adding on additional work to people's workloads.
Right. I love that. I love just capturing it in the moment so that you don't have to go write it up or put it just, and whatever. Cause like I've been using, well, I have a group that I coach long term. We had a master class last week and I invited a colleague in who works a lot with AI and she gave us sort of a crash course, but now I'm using Otter
Yeah.
Pilot, like on my meetings, for me. So like if when I'm doing calls with people, um you know strategy sessions, these influence assessments that I do for folks, I'm recording it so they don't have to be jotting down notes, and I don't take a lot of notes because I want to be really present, and then I'll do a follow-up call and I'm like, what did we talk about? Oh my god. Because I was so present, I
Yeah.
didn't write anything down.
Yeah.
So now I don't have to worry about that. So I'm finding it lovely, and I would encourage people to explore something like that you can incorporate, because I think not only that, but Sarah, it's like whoever takes down the notes, whatever happens is going through their filter,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And their edits, and right, and their perception. But now, like, hey, we have this all documented. We don't have to worry about every way. You could just be present and have the conversation. Then you're back, what did that person say? Because that was so good. And like, you can just go look at it. You don't have to, and it's just right there. And I love that, because I love what you're saying is like, you can do this and it's not more work. Like those
Right.
12 articles that you do quarterly, that can be monthly, bi-weekly, weekly. Right? If you do 12 articles a quarter, that means you can do 1 article a week, right?
Yeah.
For 12 weeks. And then you're not creating any more work.
Right.
You're just spreading it out like drip, 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 drip. That's my biggest thing. You said a month. My biggest thing is one a week, but a
Mhm.
lot of folks that feels like a lot. So if you're quarterly, go monthly. If you're monthly, try it every other week. If you're every other week, just every week, just tell a little story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think too, I mean, we train people, all of us, if you take a look at your inbox right now of, newsletter and lists that you're subscribed to, there are ones that every time it lands, you think, oh yeah, this newsletter, I wonder what they have to say today. And then you have other ones that you just keep thinking, oh, I have to unsubscribe to that. I just haven't gotten around to it. Right. But if you open an email and it makes you feel a particular way, and that way is good or interested or engaged or curious or any sort of positive emotion, you're going to remember that the next time it lands in your inbox, like, oh yeah, the last time this organization messaged me, it reminded me of why I got involved in the first place. Wonder what they have to say this week. And whereas if every time I hear from this organization they send me 12 unrelated stories that have nothing to do with me, or they just keep asking me for money, I don't want to hear from them anymore. And I'm not going to be opening those emails.
Right, right. And I hope everyone who's listening, if you're not on my list, because I work really hard to give value every week. Like
Yeah.
every week I give value. And I'm like, is this a right? I mean, I don't even ask anymore because I know. And that's what I teach people to do as well. When I'm a value to you, you'll be a value to me. All right, now here's a big thing. This is I just look like, wow, we're having this great conversation. I didn't even look at the time. So let's just do a couple more questions, because one of the biggest
Yeah.
things is budget. So talk to
Yeah.
me about, I don't have a lot of budget. I don't have a lot of staff. How can I, get better at fundraising?
Yeah. I think, the majority of things that I recommend to my clients that I work with don't cost anything. They cost staff time, or volunteer time, but I'm not a big fan of like spending money on things. I don't think it's necessary to get the results that you need, especially when you're just starting out in a small nonprofit. I think, as we've talked about a lot, really working to engage with donors, and that does take some additional staff time. And if you don't have budget or your time is really limited, if you can, I would say to test some of these new ways of engagement with just a small percentage of your donor base, and then track those results over time. So, if there's ways that you can communicate differently, if there's ways that you can reach out differently, just test it and see and track what those results are, which isn't going to cost you anything besides time. I would also say, take a look at where you are spending a lot of money, where you don't need to. So for example, I had a client that was sending out twice a year, full on DM packages with the return letter and the envelope and the stamp and everything. And what they were finding was most people were donating online anyways. So we did a test and we said, we can save some money and test this by just sending a postcard with a QR code and see if we still have the same results. And we actually had higher results in terms of the return, but we also spent a fraction. So that money that is now no longer on DM, let's reallocate that somewhere else. So you can make kind of smart shifts with your budget, as opposed to, having to bring in additional funds to cover some of the things that you're trying to do.
All right. I love that. What a great example, of just like looking at if it's not working, let's, and then we can allocate those resources to other things. And, and I think that is a small shop. Remember, because that you have that autonomy, that you can make those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can take a look and see, what are the shifts that can be made, and the larger organizations, they don't have the ability to shift things so quickly. So I do think that's a benefit.
I feel so seen today. So I just bring people on my podcast like, yep. This is awesome. I just love what you're doing. I love, the emphasis on small, using what you have, really just making those shifts, like some simple shifts to give you some big results. I think that's going to give people a lot of encouragement. Okay, just a couple more things. What's the best way to get a hold of you if somebody is interested in talking about Charity Shift and, or working with you?
Yeah, great. So my website is charityshift.ca. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I always love chatting with people on LinkedIn. So if you're able to drop my my LinkedIn
we'll put the link in there.
Profile, that would be awesome. Love to hear from people there. I do have what I like to call donor touch points, so gratitude touch points that you can download from my website, charityshift.ca. And that's just a suggestion to get people started of here are some of the things that you can do to better connect and engage with your donors.
Oh, cool. So some of this stuff we talked about, those language shifts, they're in that on there?
Yeah.
Okay,
it's
awesome.
More a little bit less of the language shift, more kind of some tangible things, but happy to provide that content for people as well.
Okay, Charity Shift CA, and the links in the show notes, if you want to go grab that. All right, last question as always. Okay. I'm a karaoke queen. I love karaoke. So I'm in Toronto, you're in St. Louis. What's your go-to song? What are we hearing, Sarah?
Is it a duet or a solo?
Whatever you want.
Okay, so duet, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, Elton John and Kiki Lee.
Kiki.
And the second one, oh my gosh, Ella Fitzgerald's Summertime.
Ooh.
I love that song.
I want to hear you sing that song.
I don't know about that, but I do love it. What's yours?
Oh gosh, honey, I got on my notes app, I've got a whole list. Lately I've been like Dua Lipa. I've been singing because she's a queen.
Ooh,
Levitating. See, I didn't sing for a little while. I just kind of got up. So, but I one of the numbers is like, oh good Lord, all right, everybody, it's Fergie MILF money. I got the MILF money. And it's kind of hilarious when I do it. Then I do like 80s stuff and show tunes and all that. I just depends on what I'm feeling. I have friends who sing the same song and they've been singing the same song. I always like new stuff. you know, but here's the thing, you can say, oh, karaoke, but I'm telling you, this is like full-bodied self-expression, right? It works on so many things that I work on: confidence, risk taking, right? Vulnerability, open, all of those things you can say, oh, but it takes a lot to be able to let go of the result, right? Like let go of the outcome and just sing the song and see what happens.
Totally. And to just be vulnerable and say, I might hit the wrong note and I might say the wrong words, and we're all going to laugh and we're going to have a great time.
Exactly. And that is, and
And
I'm
then
just
somebody else will go.
from that place of just excitement, fun, possibility. And so this is like a way to just practice those, all these things that I work on and that I teach and coach people on are those same things, you know, like people want vulnerability, they want transparency, they want to feel connected. And so much of, especially in the nonprofit space, we're taught you have to be super shiny and, you know, and perfect. And like, that's not what connects you to people. And so helping people kind of take their guard down a little bit. Like, it's okay not to be perfect. It's so great. But that's what we were taught, you know, that, you know what I mean? Like you had to like have every outcome, like you couldn't show one thing wrong lest a donor leave you or whatever. But what really attracts people,
human.
you're right. What? I'm a human being. What? Dang it. Well, Sarah, this was lovely. I can't wait. Well, now I have to figure out a way to hear you sing Summertime. So we're just gonna have to make that happen. Thank you for everything. Again, charityshift.ca. It's in the show notes if you don't get it. Thanks so much, Sarah. I loved having you on this episode of The Influential Nonprofit. And that's it for me in this episode. If you haven't yet, you can go to theinfluentialnonprofit.com. You can download your uplevel your influence starter kit. It's all kinds of cool stuff about all the things I talk about, you know, releasing the outcome and all of those things. And you can find that a bunch of really cool resources there that you can download. Thanks, everybody.